In the quiet, remote hills of eastern Kentucky, there's a story that's puzzled historians for almost 2 centuries. In 1834, Reverend Ezekiel Morrison and his 9-year-old twin daughters, Rebecca and Rachel, arrived at Pine Hollow, a tiny Baptist community that was so isolated it barely appeared on maps at the time. What happened during their 3-day stay has been documented in a journal by Pastor William Phillips, which was discovered in 1987 when the church was torn down. The journal reveals strange events that have left modern experts baffled. The Morrison twins seemed to know things they shouldn't have known, things that defied explanation. They predicted future events, uncovered hidden secrets, and described people they'd never met or tragedies that happened before they were born. And, shockingly, everything they said turned out to be true. This story, however, isn't for everyone. It's for those who want to explore mysteries that challenge what we think we know about reality. Before we dive deeper into this strange case, make sure you're subscribed, because we're about to uncover details that most historians won't discuss. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from, because what happened in Kentucky might not be as far from you as you think. The story begins with something even more unsettling than the supernatural, the possibility that some people can access information in ways that science can't explain yet. Back in 1834, Kentucky was a place where civilization and wilderness met. Pine Hollow, where the Morrison family arrived, was a small settlement founded in 1818 by 3 families seeking religious freedom. By the time Ezekiel and his daughters came to visit, the community had fewer than 200 people, mostly related by blood or marriage. They all followed strict Baptist teachings, which shaped their everyday lives. Their church, built by the community itself, was made from local timber, and Pastor Phillips kept detailed records of births, deaths, and important events. These records would become crucial to documenting the strange happenings that followed. Ezekiel Morrison was a well-known preacher, traveling on foot with his daughters from church to church across the Appalachian region. He was a man of great faith who had lost his wife, Sarah, 9 years earlier during a winter storm that had isolated their home. The twins, Rebecca and Rachel, were identical in appearance but very different in personality. Rebecca was outgoing and charismatic, while Rachel was quiet and observant. Despite their differences, the two seemed to share an almost eerie connection. Rebecca would often finish Rachel's sentences or answer questions before her sister had a chance to speak. What made the Morrison family especially notable among preachers was Ezekiel's ability to bring spiritual renewal to struggling communities. His preaching was powerful, but it was often the twins' quiet influence that seemed to spark the real changes. Their arrival at Pine Hollow was particularly difficult due to the autumn rains, which made the mountain paths treacherous. When they finally arrived on the evening of November 15, 1834, they were exhausted, and Ezekiel had to carry Rachel for the last few miles because she had a fever. Pastor Phillips, who was finishing evening prayers with the small congregation, noted that the family appeared physically and spiritually drained. Though the girls seemed weak, there was something in their eyes, an alertness that seemed unusual for children their age, that made Phillips feel uneasy. The congregation at Pine Hollow had welcomed many traveling preachers over the years, but there was something different about the Morrison family from the start. That night, as they shared a simple meal with the Phillips family, Rebecca casually asked Mrs. Phillips about the roses in her garden, specifically asking if they had recovered from a blight that had nearly destroyed them 3 summers before. Mrs. Phillips was shocked. No one outside the community had known about the blight, yet Rebecca seemed to know all about it. When asked how she knew, Rebecca said she had dreamed about the roses while walking and somehow just knew that Mrs. Phillips grew the most beautiful ones in the county. This strange event was just the beginning. The next morning, Pastor Phillips found Ezekiel sitting by the fire, deeply concerned. When Phillips asked about it, Ezekiel explained that the twins had had unsettling dreams the night before, dreams about the places they were going to visit, but these dreams felt different, darker than usual. Before Phillips could respond, Rebecca entered the room and made a chilling statement. In your church, beneath the 3rd floorboard from the altar, there's something hidden that shouldn't be there. Rachel dreamed about it, and I dreamed about why it's hidden. Phillips was stunned. He had hidden a bottle of whiskey beneath those exact floorboards months earlier, a secret he'd never shared with anyone, not even his wife. As the day went on, the twins continued to reveal personal secrets about the members of the congregation. Rebecca told Samuel Turner, a prosperous farmer, that he had been taking money from the church collection and asked if returning it would be considered stealing. Turner had been secretly skimming from the collection for months to cover debts from a failed business venture, and hearing Rebecca speak about it left him shaken. Rachel then spoke to Martha Whitfield, an elderly widow, about the real reason her husband had disappeared years earlier. He hadn't died in an accident, but had abandoned his family and taken their savings. Martha had told everyone her husband had died to protect her dignity, but Rachel knew the truth. One by one, the twins spoke to more people, revealing secrets they had no way of knowing. They spoke about hidden affairs, past mistakes, and things people thought were long buried. The community was in shock. But it was Rebecca's final statement that would haunt Pastor Phillips for the rest of his life. Standing before the altar, she placed her hand on the cross and said, "This is sacred ground, but it's been stained by what happened here before." She then spoke about the tragic deaths of the Whitman family, claiming they hadn't died in a house fire, but had actually been killed right there in the church. This revelation struck the community like a bolt of lightning. The Whitman family's deaths were Pine Hollow's darkest secret. In 1818, when the settlement was still small, the Whitman family had been pillars of the community. Jacob Whitman was the local blacksmith, and his wife, Mary, was known for her skills in herbal medicine and childbirth. Their twin daughters, Hope and Faith, were beloved by everyone. The official story was that the family died in a tragic fire, but the truth was much darker, and Rebecca had uncovered it. The community of Pine Hollow had mourned, rebuilt, and carried on, as frontier communities often do after tragedy strikes. But Rebecca's chilling statement about the Whitman family's deaths forced some of the older members to confront a painful truth they had hoped would stay buried forever. Elder Thompson, now 73 and one of the founding families of Pine Hollow, slowly rose from his pew. Though his arthritis made every movement painful, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience. "Child," he began, his words slow and deliberate, "you speak of things that happened before you were born, in places you've never been. How could you possibly know about what you claim to know?" Rebecca turned to face him, her blue eyes steady and unervingly mature. "Faith Whitman had a birthmark on her left shoulder," she said quietly. "Hope had one on her right ankle. Faith always carried a wooden doll that their father carved. Hope wore a silver locket with their mother's hair inside. When they died, Faith was in her blue Sunday dress, and Hope was in her nightgown because she had been sick with a fever." The details Rebecca shared left the older members of the congregation stunned. Elder Thompson's wife clutched his arm, her face pale with recognition and fear. Rebecca's voice was soft but clear as she continued. "They didn't die in a fire. They came to the church seeking sanctuary because someone was after them. They hid behind the altar, but they were found anyway." The room fell eerily quiet. Pastor Phillips, listening intently, began to recall fragments of past conversations. Whispers that stopped when he entered the room, meaningful glances exchanged when certain topics were mentioned. He remembered how some families always left flowers at an unmarked spot in the cemetery. Samuel Turner, still shaken by Rebecca's earlier revelation about his financial wrongdoings, stood up. "This is madness," he declared, though his voice lacked the conviction he tried to muster. "These children are making up stories to frighten us. There's no way they could know these things." But as Samuel spoke, more details started coming to light. Mrs. Carter, Elizabeth's mother-in-law, whispered about bloodstains that had appeared on the church floor years later, stains that couldn't be scrubbed away. Old Benjamin Foster mentioned the strange noises that sometimes echoed through the church late at night, noises that sounded like children crying, which had always been written off as the wind. Dr. Hayes, who had been embarrassed by his earlier revelations, now spoke up. "I've always wondered about the church's foundation," he said slowly. "When I helped repair the eastern wall 3 years ago, we found what looked like bone fragments mixed with the mortar." The weight of his words sank in. If the Whitman family had died in the church, and their bodies had been secretly buried within the church's very foundation, it meant that every prayer, every service had taken place over their unmarked graves. The entire community had been living on a lie, with a hidden truth beneath their feet. Ezekiel Morrison, who had been silent up until this point, looked deeply concerned, but not surprised. He had seen this before, his daughters revealing impossible knowledge that unraveled carefully guarded secrets and truths that had been buried for years. Pastor Phillips, now overcome with questions, asked, "Mr. Morrison, how do your daughters know these things? What sort of gift allows them such insight?" Ezekiel paused for a long time before answering, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I've asked myself that question every day for years," he finally said. Their mother, Sarah, claimed to have second sight, the ability to sense things beyond normal perception. But what the girls experience goes far beyond anything Sarah ever demonstrated. They dream of places they've never been, speak about people they've never met, and know details about events that happened before they were born. Ezekiel's voice faltered, filled with a mix of love and sorrow as he continued. "At first, I thought it was a blessing, a gift to help me minister to those in need. But over the years, I've come to wonder if it's something else entirely. The knowledge they carry, it's a heavy burden. They know things no child should ever have to know." Just then, the twins stood together at the front of the church, looking small and vulnerable for the first time since they'd arrived. They looked like children again, overwhelmed by the adult world they had been thrust into. "We don't choose what we see," Rebecca said quietly, her earlier confidence now replaced with a weariness that made her seem far older than her years. "The dreams come whether we want them or not. We see what was, what is, and sometimes what will be." Rachel stood by her sister, her hand in Rebecca's. "The Whitman sisters visit our dreams sometimes. They want people to know what really happened to them. They want someone to remember them properly." The silence in the church grew heavy as people wrestled with the truth Rebecca and Rachel had just revealed. Some looked skeptical, others fearful, and a few even held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life after death than they had believed. Pastor Phillips found himself at a crossroads. He could dismiss the twins' claims as childish fantasy or lies to maintain the stability of the community. Or he could seek the truth, no matter where it led, even if it meant shaking the very foundations Pine Hollow was built upon. What he chose would have consequences none of them could foresee. That evening, as night fell over Pine Hollow, Pastor Phillips struggled to focus on his evening prayers. The twins' revelations had shaken him deeply, not just because of how accurate they were, but because they forced him to face questions he'd long avoided. 5 years earlier, he had come to Pine Hollow to escape the theological battles that had raged in Kentucky's larger towns. His predecessor, Pastor Moriah Hayes, had left behind detailed records of births, deaths, and significant events, but there had always been something strange about the records from Pine Hollow's earliest days. The winter of 1818 in particular seemed oddly sparse. There were entries about harsh weather, shortages, and the deaths of a few elderly residents, but the Whitman family's tragedy was barely mentioned. The official records said the family died in a house fire on December 21st, but that didn't match the level of detail Pastor Phillips had seen in the rest of the records. Determined to uncover the truth, Pastor Phillips began searching through the church's old records. He discovered a small, leather journal, one he had never seen before. The pages were worn and fragile, but the handwriting was unmistakably Pastor Hayes's. What Phillips read that night by candlelight would change his understanding of Pine Hollow's history forever. The journal revealed that Pastor Hayes had been deeply troubled by the events surrounding the Whitman family's death. According to Hayes's notes, Jacob Whitman had uncovered something deeply disturbing about certain community members, something so serious that he had demanded public confessions and reparations. The details were unclear, but Hayes's writing suggested that it involved financial corruption and possibly something worse. On the night of December 20th, 1818, Jacob had confronted several community leaders in a heated meeting. The last entry in the journal, dated December 22nd, was chilling. "The Lord forgive us all for what was done." Jacob and his family came to the church seeking sanctuary, but they were followed. "I heard the children crying, then silence. When morning came, we found them as they had been left. Elder Thompson and the others insisted we must protect the community's future. I have agreed to their plan. May God have mercy on my soul." Pastor Phillips set the journal down, trembling. The implications were staggering. The Whitman family hadn't died in a fire. They had been murdered in the church, and the leaders of Pine Hollow had conspired to cover it up. But how could the Morrison twins know all these hidden details? How could they speak about the children's clothes, their belongings, and the events with such accuracy? As Pastor Phillips pondered these questions, a soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found Rebecca standing in the moonlight, her braided hair neat, as if she had been preparing for something important. "You found Pastor Hayes's journal, didn't you?" she asked simply. "The one he hid behind the loose stone in the foundation." Pastor Phillips stared in shock. He had found the journal exactly there, guided by a faint draft that led him to the hidden stone. "How did you know where to tell me to look?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Faith showed me in a dream," Rebecca replied matter-of-factly. "She said Pastor Hayes was a good man who was forced to do bad things. She wanted someone to know the truth." The casual way Rebecca spoke of receiving guidance from a long-dead child sent chills down Pastor Phillips's spine. "Rebecca," he asked, his voice low, "what exactly do you see when you have these dreams?" For a moment, the child's expression grew serious, and Pastor Phillips could see the burden she carried. "We see everything," she said simply. "Not just what happened, but why it happened." Rebecca looked past him toward the window where Rachel Saturday. "The men who killed the Whitman family didn't plan to hurt anyone. They just wanted Jacob to stay quiet about what he'd discovered." "Jacob found out about the church's money," Rebecca continued. "Some of it was stolen from travelers passing through. He discovered it when he was asked to make horseshoes for horses that belonged to dead men. The pieces began to fall into place. Pine Hollow's early years had been marked by mysterious disappearances of travelers. Officially, these were attributed to natural dangers, wild animals, accidents, or exposure. But if Jacob Whitman had discovered that some travelers had been murdered and robbed, it meant that the church had been built with stolen money. "That's why faith and hope can't rest," Rebecca said quietly. "Their blood was spilled on ground that was already cursed." Pastor Phillips found himself facing a truth more horrifying than anything he had ever imagined. The church he had dedicated his life to, the sanctuary where he had prayed and sought guidance, was built on a foundation of lies, corruption, and bloodshed. And yet, as he grappled with these revelations, he was still left with a question that burned in his mind. How could he verify any of this? How could he separate supernatural insight from a carefully crafted deception? The answer would soon come, and it would challenge everything he thought he knew. "I represent the estate of Marcus Webb," Brennan announced as he accepted Pastor Phillips's hospitality. "Mr. Webb recently passed away in Louisville, and among his belongings, we found documents suggesting he had business dealings with this community in its early years. I'm here to trace certain funds that may have been irregularly transferred." Pastor Phillips felt a chill run through him. The name Marcus Webb was familiar. It had appeared in Pastor Hayes's secret journal, among the list of travelers who had disappeared on the mountain paths in 1818 and 1819. Hayes's notes indicated that Webb had been carrying a substantial amount of money meant for land purchases in Tennessee. Before Phillips could respond, Rebecca appeared at his side, as if summoned. She looked up at Brennan and said, "Mr. Webb had a gold watch with his initials inside the cover. It had a crack in the crystal because he dropped it when he fell from his horse." Brennan's composure faltered. "How could you possibly know about Marcus Webb's watch?" he demanded. "That detail was mentioned only in his private correspondence with his brother." Rachel, as if appearing by instinct, stepped up beside Rebecca. "The watch is buried behind the church," she said softly, "along with his money bag and his horse's bridle. Elder Thompson put them there after what happened on the trail." The revelation struck Phillips like a physical blow. If the twins were correct, if Marcus Webb's personal effects were buried behind the church, it would prove their knowledge extended far beyond what any normal child could possess. More importantly, it would serve as tangible evidence of the crimes that had funded Pine Hollow's development. Brennan wasted no time. "I demand we excavate the area immediately," he declared. "If what these children claim is true, we're looking at evidence of robbery and murder." Elder Thompson, who had been watching from a distance, approached slowly, clearly reluctant. At 73, he was the last surviving member of the original leadership council. His weathered face showed a mix of resignation and defiance. You speak of things you don't understand, stranger, Thompson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had led the community for decades. This community was built by God-fearing people who did what they had to do to survive. Survival doesn't justify murder, Brennan shot back sharply. If these allegations are true, this entire settlement was built on criminal acts. Rebecca turned her unsettling blue eyes on Elder Thompson. Mr. Thompson, she said gently, the nightmares stopped coming after the first year, didn't they? You told yourself that meant God had forgiven you. Thompson's composure cracked. Child, he whispered, you couldn't know about those dreams. No one knows about the dreams where Marcus Webb begged you to let him go, Rachel added, her soft voice clear in the morning air. About how you see his face every night before you fall asleep. The old man sank onto a tree stump, as though his legs could no longer support him. It wasn't supposed to happen, he whispered, his voice breaking. We only meant to take the money. We were starving. Our children were sick, and winter was coming. But Webb fought back. And then, the confession hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Pastor Phillips realized he was witnessing the unraveling of everything he had believed about his community, his church, and his faith. Ezekiel Morrison, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. The truth has a way of surfacing, he said quietly. My daughters don't choose what they reveal. They're simply conduits for information that demands to be heard. Without wasting time, Brennan organized an excavation party. By midday, a group of men from the community began digging behind the church, guided by the twins' precise directions. Pastor Phillips watched in growing dread, knowing that each shovelful of earth brought them closer to evidence that could destroy Pine Hollow's carefully constructed history. They didn't have to dig far. Just 3 feet below the surface, their shovels struck something metallic. Carefully brushing away the soil, they uncovered a tarnished gold pocket watch. Its crystal was cracked, just as Rebecca had described, and the initials MW were clearly visible inside the cover. Beside the watch lay a leather money bag, its contents deteriorated by time, but still unmistakably present. The horse's bridle, though rotted, was still recognizable. Brennan examined the recovered items carefully. This watch matches Marcus Webb's description exactly, he said, confirming the findings. The crack in the crystal, the engraving, even the unusual chain link. But it was Elder Thompson's reaction that provided the most damning confirmation. There were others, he muttered. Webb wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last. Travelers came through, often carrying money for land deals. The truth became clear. Pine Hollow hadn't been built through divine providence but financed through systematic robbery and murder. Pastor Phillips struggled with deeper questions. How could the Morrison twins know details that no living person should have? Their knowledge defied any rational explanation. As the sun set over Pine Hollow, casting long shadows over the excavation site, Phillips realized the community was at a crossroads. The truth was emerging after 16 years of concealment, but it brought unsettling questions about justice, redemption, and the nature of reality itself. The Morrison twins, now standing silently, were listening to something only they could hear. Their small figures were silhouetted against the church, a church built with blood money. Tomorrow would bring reckoning, but tonight belonged to the dead. By morning, officials from the county seat arrived, led by Judge Harrison, who set up his temporary court in the church. Elder Thompson, weary from guilt, sat in the front pew with 2 other elderly men from the original leadership council. Judge Harrison, after interviewing the twins, asked Rebecca how she knew the location of Marcus Webb's personal effects. Faith Whitman told me in a dream, Rebecca answered simply. She said the same men who killed her family also killed the travelers. Rachel confirmed, the dreams come to both of us. We see what happened as if we were there. Sheriff Mackenzie pressed further, asking how many people had been killed along the mountain trails. Rebecca answered, 11 men over 3 years. One was a preacher named Samuel Collins, who was going to start a new church. Elder Thompson, trembling with guilt, finally confessed. We followed the Whitman family to the church, thinking sacred ground would protect them, but we were desperate men. Rebecca added, there were unborn babies with the Whitman family. For souls crying out for justice. Her words shocked everyone, challenging Christian beliefs about the afterlife. Thompson's confession deepened the gravity of the case. "I can't carry this burden anymore," he whispered. "We planned it together. We carried it out together." The twins provided further shocking details about the victims, revealing their personal lives and offering profound insights that no one could deny. Rebecca stated, "The crimes didn't stop in 1820. People are still disappearing." Judge Harrison responded with urgency, "Sheriff Mackenzie, we need to expand our investigation immediately." As the proceedings continued, the Morrison twins had fulfilled their role as voices for the dead, and the community prepared for a reckoning. 3 weeks later, Pine Hollow was a ghost town, its buildings sold to compensate the victims' families.